Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, March 21st, 2016, start of a brand new week here. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Daniel is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Now, as you know, the big AIPAC Fest is underway. It started over the weekend, and it's basically Israel coming here and conventioning with their supporters to hand the U.S. government their instructions on behalf of Tel Aviv for the next year. And Jewish leaders are basically on the warpath against Donald Trump and his so-called hate speech. And AIPAC, I think there's a couple of things going on here. AIPAC wants to reassert that they are in control of America's political process. And, of course, everybody's waiting for Donald Trump's speech, which is going to be, I think, about 5:30, 5:45 Eastern Time tonight. Find out if he's going to maintain his independent position or not. Joe Biden has already addressed the AIPAC convention and made a not-so-subtle jab at Donald Trump, saying that the world needs bridge builders, not wall builders. Well, Joe Biden, how do you feel about that wall being built around what remains of Palestine by Israel? I don't see you really taking that to task very much. I guess some walls are good and some walls are bad, and the walls that are bad are the ones that interfere with this new world order agenda of blurring everybody together into one mass of humanity with no clear idea who they are to make them more useful to the new world order. Now, Hillary Clinton has attacked Donald Trump for taking a neutral stance toward Israel-Palestine and basically came on out and said America can never be neutral when it comes to Israel's security and survival. And anyone who doesn't understand that has no business being our president. Well, Hillary is proving once again she's a loyal whore to Israel, but she's absolutely wrong. If the majority of the American people want the U.S. to maintain a neutral position on peace between Israel and Palestine, then Donald Trump is the president who will reflect that position. And I would remind you that prior to 9/11, the official U.S. policy was one of neutrality in arbitrating between Israel and Palestine. After 9/11, that went away, and the U.S. was bullied and blackmailed into being all Israel all the time. So you better all decide if you are sick and tired of all of our politicians who are out there more worried about Israel than they are about the safety of your tap water, and vote accordingly. Now, apparently there have been protests in many places across the nation, including in front of the White House, to protest against the Israeli regime and its undue influence over the American government. And remember, no government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel cannot, will not, and does not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. And in these dark, troubled times, America needs leaders who are going to put America first, second, and third. That's what we need. Not just in the White House, but in the Congress as well. Now, Bernie Sanders skipped AIPAC, which I think is a plus for the man. Not showing up here. Now, Bernie Sanders has announced that he is going to go after Hillary Clinton's superdelegates. Now, their corporate media is trying to spin it as he's poaching her superdelegates, as if she already owns them and Bernie Sanders is stealing them. No, the superdelegates are the superdelegates because they're allowed to vote their conscience without regard to any state primaries. And they are fair game for Bernie Sanders. And Sanders is going to have to get some of those superdelegates, or basically surrender to Hillary winning the nomination. Now, up in Utah, as you know, we got a bunch of more primaries tomorrow, and the skullduggery seems to be on display already up in Utah. There was an article in Variety.com that flat out says, I'm not buying the Utah poll by Y2 Analytics showing Cruz is up 24 points. And remember, if they're going to steal the election, they have to rig the polls as well, so it isn't obvious that's what they're doing. But where it really gets kind of interesting is apparently Smartmatic Group, this is the electronic voting firm, is running the online balloting process in the Utah Republican Open Caucuses tomorrow. The chairman of Smartmatic's board, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, currently serves on the board of George Soros' Open Society Foundation and has close ties to the billionaire. Plus we have, of course, Soros's funding Move On and Black Lives Matter and all this New World Order stuff. And he's trying to get Trump out there. And I think, without realizing it, George Soros has become the greatest argument in favor of socialism in the nation by showing how individuals with too much money can cause a great deal of mischief. So Soros is rapidly making himself into the poster boy for becoming a socialist nation to prevent that kind of mischief. Now then, remember in Arizona where a bunch of anti-Trump protesters showed up and they blocked the road and they chained themselves to the cars, and the lead protester who chained her neck to a pickup truck was Jacinta Gonzalez from New Orleans. She's not even in Arizona. Now, Jacinta Gonzalez is a trained community organizer and a Soros fellow. She is from Mexico, and she was trained by the Soros organization. In case you weren't paying attention to it, Soros' whole argument against Donald Trump is Donald Trump wants to shut the borders. And Soros wants them open. He wants to blur us all together into a bunch of humanity with no clear idea who we are to make it more difficult for us to stand up against oligarchs. Another article coming out of thepeoplesvoice.org, George Soros' anti-Trump campaign. His groups are subversive, undermining fundamental freedoms, listed as undesirable foreign organizations in Russia for good reason. And what's really amazing with all these dirty tricks, Soros-hired thugs are out there causing a ruckus. And this makes George Soros guilty of violating the USA Patriot Act in that he is encouraging and sponsoring acts of violence to coerce a political change on the populace. That is the definition, one of the definitions of terrorism in the USA Patriot Act. Use of violence or the threat of violence to force people to change their political point of view. Now, Soros Group is planning the largest civil disobedience action in the century. They want to disrupt absolutely everything. And here's the irony. They're out there saying that their actions, violence, disruption, rioting, are protected speech under the First Amendment. And yet what they're trying to do is to violate Donald Trump and his supporters' constitutionally protected right to speech and assembly. That's what they were doing in Arizona. You know, our right to free speech is more important than your right to free speech. In other words, from the point of view of George Soros and his people, censorship is freedom of speech. George Orwell would be proud. We can add that to the list along with freedom is slavery, war is peace, ignorance is strength, warming is cooling. Now, so far, the millionaires and billionaires against Donald Trump have spent $63 million on all these TV ads to attack Donald Trump, and his lead is only increasing because we, the American people, understand what's going on. We understand that once again, as was the case in 2008 and 2012, the political party machine is out there to get rid of the people's choice and force one of the pre-selected, pre-approved, loved by Israel and Wall Street candidates on us. So it doesn't matter how we vote in November, we get the same raw deal we've been living in for the last 30 or more years. It's time for this to stop. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we've got a YouTube video that we linked to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. The headline reads, Black Cop Exposes Anti-Trump Protesters as, quote, most hateful, evil people ever, end quote. And it's by Officer Brandon Tatum. And he's just out there talking about, he was one of the officers out there dealing with these clashes between Trump supporters and the paid disruptors. And he says the violence is all on the side of the paid disruptors. The Trump people are very polite, very quiet. They don't want violence and upset. That only serves the interest of the establishment, which is still trying to portray Trump as causing all this violence with his racism and his hate and all the rest of it. Now, interesting article over at the New York Times, Will Trump be dumped? Mitch McConnell is telling Trump he's got to ratchet down the ferocity. You got to start talking the way we all talk, or we're going to lose out to you. And Trump says, the violence is not caused by me, it's caused by agitators. And then Trump added, Hillary is the one disrupting my rallies. It's more Hillary than Sanders, I found out, which is exactly what I said when this situation in Chicago happened and they had people out there screaming, Sanders, Sanders, Sanders. Hillary was trying to trick Trump and Sanders into a mudslinging contest, and apparently Trump has caught on to that skullduggery here. Okay, let's see. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Brian in Pennsylvania, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
All right, I go to my 22 league, which is a 22 bench rest league up in my gun club every Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And usually after the league, we sit there and BS for a little bit. And I brought up Trump, and I could not believe how much everybody, hated me after that. It was just amazing. I kept saying all this good stuff, and for some reason, a whole bunch of people that love guns, they're all defending Clinton. It was weird.
Well, that is very weird indeed, and I would suggest finding a different gun club to hang out in. And I think what's going on with Clinton supporters is they're in denial. They've been supporting her all along, and they absolutely refuse to look at any of the negatives about her because then it means they were wrong. And they don't have the courage to admit they were wrong about Hillary Clinton, so they're becoming her most fanatical supporters and devotees. And by the way, that is the royal road to dictatorship. When you have fanatical supporters who will never acknowledge negative things about the leader, because then they have to admit to themselves they were wrong to support them.
Yeah, I found a couple people that were for Trump, and I kind of rallied around them, and I bolstered them as much as possible. And I think I might have got through to maybe a handful, but most of them, they didn't want to listen to me. And I'm sorry to say, but most of them were kind of older. They were I think most of them were baby boomers, actually. And they just really they just kept saying how much Trump's rhetoric. They didn't want to say anything about what he said. It's just his rhetoric was bad. That's all they kept saying.
Well, that's actually one of the big talking points they're putting on out there, that Trump refuses to talk like the rest of the career politicians. That's why he's attractive. He's a plain speaker. And all of these professional paid liars can't compete with that. And they're trying to basically coerce him into playing the game by their rules, which will give them the advantage. And Trump is saying absolutely not. Anyway, Brian, thank you for the phone call and the update. We're going to let you go. Now, there's an article that came out over at Eric Margolis, Donald Bulldozed the Rotten GOP, and the article is written in response to all these people in the GOP leadership saying that, we have to get rid of Donald Trump. We have to save the Republican Party before Trump wrecks it. Okay, who is the Republican Party? It's not the party leadership. It is every single Republican voter in this country is the Republican Party. The leadership wants to maintain control. The leadership wants to select your candidates for you. Remember that Curly Hogan last week? We shouldn't even have primaries and caucuses. We'll pick the candidates for you. And Eric Margolis is saying, go Trump, destroy the party leadership of the GOP. And I agree. For both parties, it's time for them to go. They've gotten way too big for their britches. Time for a good dose of humble on these self-anointed political elites. Now, there's a Washington Post editorial claims that stopping Donald Trump is the only way to defend our democracy. We're right back in George Orwell speak right there. Rejecting the candidate with the most popular support is how we defend democracy? I don't think so. The Washington Post thinks the political system is just fine, except for all you voters. You voters are the problem. You won't go along with the agenda. How dare you? It's amazing. Apparently, Mexico's government is now getting involved in this, and apparently they're having an outreach program to permanent residents in the United States, trying to mobilize them to stop Trump. Because the Mexican government loves our open borders. They can throw all the losers and criminals across the border and let it be the U.S. problem. They're emptying out their prisons, driving them up to the border, saying, go over there, they'll give you free something. When the United States opened up the borders to Cuban immigration, Castro did exactly the same thing. Went down to the Cuban prisons, put them all on boats, and said 90 miles that way. Mexico doesn't want to lose that little sink for all their undesirables and their criminals. We'll let it be North America's problems here. See how much of this is being driven by foreign government intrigue, by people who think they have a right to just walk across our border without going through the legal immigration policy? Is that not bred in circuses politics? There's another article called 15 Dirty Tricks the GOP Establishment Can Use to Stop Donald Trump. I'm not going to go through them because some of them are rather long and complex, but it is an article that you should read. Now, the window of opportunity for some of these has already closed, but some of them are still there. And the GOP leadership apparently feels it is their divine right to play dirty so that they get the candidate they want, and to heck with what you, the GOP voters, want. And, of course, the DNC, under Debbie Wasserman Schultz, is doing exactly the same thing with the superdelegates. We don't care what the Democratic voters want. We're going to give you Hillary. And apparently Hillary was back on this, it's time for a woman president, when she was talking at AIPAC. Remember, Barack Obama got elected by people saying that you should vote for a black president just because he's black, and look how terrible that turned out. Now they want you to vote for Hillary just because she's a woman president. I think it's time the American voters raised their standards a little bit and started looking at who's going to do the best job for the American people and the American nation. And that's not Hillary Clinton. Now, apparently Bill Kristol is trying to get Tom Coburn or Rick Perry to step in and run third party in an effort to suck votes away from Donald Trump. It's amazing how scared they are of this man. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors. There's the music. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and getting on back to the news. Lindsey Graham is now out there pleading to John Kasich, drop out of the race so Ted Cruz can take out Donald Trump. They're not even trying to hide their bias. They're not even trying to hide how hard they're working to subvert the democratic process in this country. You will take our candidates and you will like it, Schweinhund. Now, Graham may be miscalculating, because if Kasich drops out, there's no guarantee that his supporters are going to switch over to Cruz. A lot of them might drop on over to Donald Trump's side. It's academic anyway. Kasich, at this point, says he's going to stay, but then, of course, that's what Marco Rubio was saying just before Florida. Now, over at Investment Watch blog, they put together a page of 30 years of video interviews of Donald Trump, which show that Trump is saying what he's always been saying. He hasn't changed anything. He's not flipping and flopping. He's not just saying what he thinks the crowd wants to hear. His message has been consistent and solid. You don't get that with the other candidates. They'll say one thing one day and the next day it's something else. Good example, Hillary and coal. She's at one convention saying, we're going to shut down oil and coal to save the world from global warming. Then the next day, she's talking in a coal town, and she says, oh, absolutely, coal has a future in this country. It's amazing. Latest Gallup poll, voters love Trump's tax plans, which are focused on getting rid of the loopholes and deductions for the ultra-rich. 63% of Americans support this. 17% opposed. The rest still aren't sure. They haven't studied it. And that's another reason all these millionaires and billionaires are opposing Donald Trump. How do you think they got to be millionaires and billionaires? They got special treatment. They've spent decades corrupting the Congress to rewrite the tax code to drop the tax burden on you, the working class Americans, and they get a free ride to riches. That's fascism, by the way. Donald Trump is dropping hints that if he's elected president, you will find out who really did knock down the World Trade Center, which I think is a very good thing. Now, Judge Napolitano is still insisting there will be an indictment of Hillary Clinton before the November elections. At this point, I doubt it. Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, has already telegraphed that even if the FBI recommends charges, that she is under no obligation to move forward on any of them. She's already telegraphed that. She's sending a message to Hillary, don't worry, Hillary, us gals got to stick together, and I got your back. Another article coming out of this is a YouTube video, how the Clinton Foundation is the largest money laundering operation in U.S. history, and yes, it is. This is how Hillary gets her bribes for weapons deal at the State Department. Larry Klayman, the founder of Judicial Watch, had a rock-solid case under RICO against the Clinton Foundation, but he had the misfortune of having his case assigned to a Clinton-appointed judge who just threw it out of court. Now, the FBI says they're taking over the investigation, but they're only doing that to head off any other investigations. They don't want anybody digging in here. It's a huge cesspool. Mark Faber is out there warning how Hillary could destroy the entire world. Look at how successful her so-called nation building was. Every nation she's gone into as Secretary of State is in an absolute shambles. And they ask the question, do you ever wonder how it is possible that millions of Americans could support Hillary Clinton? Diebold. Anyway, another article coming out of greenenergyinvestors.com. Clinton Foundation investigation will bring down Hillary Rodham Clinton. And they're pointing out what we already know. It's not a charity. It's an organization for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. Trump's a brawler, and he's got the facts. We know that the Clinton Foundation isn't actually incorporated as a nonprofit. We know that they've done very, very little charitable work with all that money. Mostly just enough for the media camera so that they can say they're a charity. Now, according to this article, the head of the FBI is going to recommend Hillary's indictment. And Loretta Lynch is going to refuse. And that's when it's going to really start getting ugly. And there's an interesting line inside this article. The American people will doubt her loyalty once it's exposed. And this tells me that my concerns about Hillary selling out U.S. secrets to foreign governments on her weak email server and collecting and laundering the payments to her foundation is pretty much on target. Have you noticed how nobody wants to talk about this issue at all? Not even to ridicule it. They don't even want that in the public's mind. They want it to go away. John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, says he thinks the FBI will absolutely explode if Hillary Clinton is not indicted due to politics. He's saying that there is going to be a flurry of high-level leaks, of agents blowing the whistle as to what's been going on. Because if Hillary's crimes are as serious as I suspect they are, this is treason. This is betrayal against our nation. And it's not the kind of attitude we should have in that Oval Office. Now, Hillary's out there stumping for her campaign, and her latest idea is she wants the American taxpayers, that's you, to pay for the health care of all the immigrants who get into the United States illegally. And I'm sure Mexico's government is already going out and they're grabbing all their really sick people and saying, go into the United States, they're going to pay for your health care. Those generous taxpayers, they're going to pick up the tab for that one. Hillary is counting on the immigrant vote, including the illegal immigrant vote, to push her over the top in November. That's why they're fighting so hard against voter ID laws. The voter ID laws do not discriminate against voters other than those who are not supposed to vote. They're literally selling out the nation to foreigners, whether it's foreign citizens or foreign governments. They have no love for this country whatsoever, except, of course, for Donald Trump. Now, digging into Clinton's emails, and there are now multiple websites that have all the emails with search engines on them, including WikiLeaks. And these emails are revealing a lot of what was going on inside American foreign policy, and it is not what you were told it was. The latest Clinton emails, this is over at Blacklisted News, showing how Israel was pushing to cause sectarian conflict in Syria. It's good for Israel if we can get the Sunnis and the Shias to kill each other off. And the fall of the House of Assad could ignite a sectarian war between the Shiites and the Sunnis. And Hillary said, whatever Israel wants, Israel gets. Apparently, according to these emails, Google worked with Hillary to try and overthrow Syria's Assad, acting like an extension of the CIA. And it's not quite the warm and fuzzy image of Google we all got in that movie, The Interns, is it? Which is a fun movie, but very clearly that's not what Google is really like. Now, Israel has gone out and admitted they had a role in the overthrow of Mohammed Morsi and installation of President al-Sisi, because Morsi wouldn't do what the U.S. and Israel told him to do. So they had a counter-revolution. Look at how much evil exists in the world from governments who think it's their divine right to go into other people's governments and cause chaos and turmoil. Basically, Israel just admitted they hate democracy. They don't want leaders of countries elected by the people of the countries. They want leaders they put in and control, including here in the United States of America. That's what this AIPAC is all about. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And this is definitely getting very, very ugly. Apparently on I-75, somebody defaced a Donald Trump billboard. They scratched out the word great, put in the word hate, make America hate again. They're selling this whole thing on hate. Donald Trump doesn't hate anybody. He's saying we need to reinforce our borders. That's not hate. That's common sense. Another big stink is being reported over in PatriotRising.com. Apparently in Grand Junction, Colorado, a landlord has come under severe criticism by refusing to rent to anyone who supports Donald Trump. Everybody in the moneyed class hates Donald Trump. They think he's going to try and rebalance the economic system, which means less for them and more for the American people. But if we don't rebalance the economic system, it is going to implode. That's basically what it comes down to. Story coming out of the Political Insider. CBS ran a focus group on Hillary, and the results came back absolutely horrible. Had this lunch, ran a focus group, one woman in the panel saying Hillary Clinton hasn't done anything that has made her qualified to be president. Apparently when Luntz tried to remind her of Secretary of State, one of the participants said titles aren't accomplishments. They know what Hillary really did as Secretary of State is a dark stain on the American people. They were trying to come up with something positive for Hillary, and all they got were negatives. Everybody thinks she's dishonest. Her word cannot be taken for anything, especially those people over in the coal mining area who heard her say the day before, we're going to get rid of carbon fuels, and then she comes in to talk to them. Oh, yes, coal's got a future. Absolutely. Now, Hillary Clinton launched a petition to try and get Bernie Sanders to just drop on out so that she can focus on defeating whoever it is she's going to engineer to be her rival instead of Donald Trump. And so somebody mounted a counter petition demanding Hillary Clinton drop out of the 2016 election. They needed 35,000 signatures. As of the last time I checked, they were within just a few thousand. Now, the petition is on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Please feel free to share it in your social media. Not that Hillary will pay attention to it, but if the petition crosses that threshold, it's another indicator that whatever the establishment media says about how many people love Hillary, it's not real. It's all manufactured. And again, whenever you see Hillary talking on TV at one of her campaign rallies, if you can stomach that, turn off the volume and look at her face. And by the way, one of the people in the Luntz focus group said they did that. They turn off the sound and watch Hillary's face, and they can tell she's lying. And look at the faces of the people they've got arrayed behind Hillary for the benefit of the camera. And they all look bored, like they were told to be there. Now, there's an interesting article over at lawnews.com. Judge smacks down Trump's Ted Cruz birther claims and hardly anyone covers it. And the spin of this article is that the Ted Cruz born in Canada issue is going away. Nobody really cares anymore. Well, the issue has faded from the establishment media, or the establishment media has been told not to look at it. But in the independent media, it's alive and kicking, especially since it's been revealed that Ted Cruz's mother was a Canadian citizen at the time of Ted's birth. She became a Canadian citizen 1 year after her husband did. They appear on the voter rolls. Canada did not recognize dual citizenship back then. She had to renounce her U.S. citizenship to be a Canadian citizen, and he was born in Canada, which doesn't satisfy natural born. Now, on this article, it's very obvious that Ted Cruz has hired some kind of a public relations firm to follow anybody around the net questioning his eligibility for the presidency and just constantly scream at it, you know, you're a Cruz hater, we have all these constitutional lawyers and they all say he's eligible and blah, blah. Oh, well, you know, there's nothing in the Constitution that says I have to let a lawyer think for me. Look at all the experts who agreed that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons. Look at the consensus of scientists who back in 2000 said snow was a thing of the past. There's nothing in the Constitution that says I have to take the word of anybody in the government about anything at all. It's just not in there. And by the way, the Constitution does not vest the Supreme Court with final arbitration over what is constitutional and what is not. The Supreme Court grabbed that for itself. That was after the Marbury versus Madison decision, which said laws repugnant to the Constitution are automatically null and void. You don't have to wait for somebody on high in a funny-looking robe to say, yes, you were right, this is unconstitutional. We are free to act on our own if a law is clearly in violation of the Constitution. And all of Cruz's supporters are willing to turn a blind eye to his eligibility issue, and they may succeed in making him the candidate because they're that scared of Donald Trump. But does anybody out there think for 1 second that if Cruz becomes the Republican nominee for the White House, that Hillary's lawyers are not going to go after him on this issue? Of course they are. And the United States presidential election of 2016 is going to have just one name on that general election ballot. How is that democracy? How is it a republic? Now, things are not going well for John McCain. His legacy of corruption and deception and slavery to Israel is catching up with him. Now, McCain has 100% name recognition in the state that he's represented in either the Senate or the House since 1983. But he is being challenged by Representative Ann Kirkpatrick. And she's neck and neck with him right now. And what's harming McCain is a problem for everybody in the Congress. They've been there too long. The voters are leery of the Washington insiders and the career politicians. There is a tremendous anti-incumbency fever sweeping this land, and that's a good thing. We were never supposed to have a permanent ruling class of oligarchs. That's not the way the nation was set up. I'm sure McCain is already out there talking to the electronic voting machine companies about favors he'll do for them if the election goes his way. Story coming out of Sputnik News. U.S. propaganda push against Russia may shred basic constitutional freedoms. And basically, they're talking about these two senators who were proposing a new law to basically further legalize propaganda against you, the American citizens, and government action against anybody challenging that propaganda. It's an obvious First Amendment violation. And then they dropped it. And I think the reason they dropped it is if there's a law saying the government is using propaganda on the American people, then the American people are going to look at everything coming out of the government and the establishment media and say, this is just more of the propaganda. That was a big part of what contributed to the downfall of the Soviet Union. Everybody knew anything coming out of Pravda or Izvestia was just total bovine excrement. And our government and our establishment media are in exactly the same situation today. Nobody trusts anything they have to say. Now, apparently over in New York, lawmakers voted to slash $485 million in funds, almost $500 million for City University of New York because they dared criticize Israel. Now, criticizing Israel is protected speech under the First Amendment. So is boycotting Israel. And we have these New York lawmakers are clearly ignorant or just refuse to comply with the Constitution. We're just going to punish anybody that dares criticize Israel. You're not allowed to criticize Israel. You're permitted to criticize Obama. You're permitted to criticize Putin, certainly. You're permitted to criticize anything, but you're not permitted to criticize Israel, which tells us we don't have freedom of speech. We have permitted speech. And all dictatorships have permitted speech. That's a common feature of all dictatorships. You're free to talk about the things we let you talk about. Freedom of speech is an absolute. You either have it or you do not. And New York lawmakers are trying to take that away, at least in New York. You will only talk about the things we agree with. That's not freedom of speech. It's not freedom at all. It's tyranny and dictatorship. Alrighty, we got to take a break here for top of the hour news and commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one more thing that Hillary said in her speech before AIPAC is that Iran poses a threat to Israel. And she's just pandering to Israel again. The reverse is true. Who's always been invading and overthrowing the government of Iran? The U.S. When was the last time Iran invaded another country in a war of conquest? It's been over 200 years. It is not their nature. They just want to be left alone to do business, sell their oil, and run their country for the benefit of the Iranian people. But that, of course, is a big threat to the globalists who think all the nations of planet Earth ought to be run for the benefit of the money junkies. We're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. John in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm calling in regard to an article that you had on your website this weekend by Investment Watch. And this guy was making a case on the video about how quantitative easing is essentially debt cancellation. And I couldn't make heads or tails about what he was talking about. Do you recall that article? And if so, could you break that down?
Well, basically, the short version is that this quantitative easing is they're pouring money onto these Wall Street firms to erase their debts with. In theory, it's just more debt. But somewhere down the road, according to this particular theory, is they're just going to zero off the books and say it doesn't exist anymore.
But then at that point, all the real assets that were borrowed against are owned by the Federal Reserve anyway, right? So it has to end.
If they zero out the debt, they don't collect the collateral.
Let's take, for example, all the houses and everything that went under, and then the Federal Reserve really wound up bailing out Fannie Mae, right? They had to take all that bad debt and put it on their books. Now, they have a real asset sitting there in exchange for something they just created out of nothing.
Well,
so,
that's what private central banking is all about. They create all...
I understand
that. Okay.
But they're saying that I don't understand how... I don't know if it's essentially debt cancellation or just the fact that, look, there's no more money to be had, and you own the monopoly board now. You own all the properties, you own all the railroads, you own everything.
Well, I think there may be another agenda at work with this, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to move all of the debt that's covered by credit default swaps into debt that is underneath the FDIC. In other words, they're going to stick the American taxpayer with the bill when it all comes apart, and they're going to protect the money junkies. We already saw it last week where we had Deutsche Bank is hovering on the edge there, and they sold something like $1 trillion worth of their credit default swaps to J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citi. And, of course, again, they're trying to shuffle things around so that their wealth is protected and all of the debt from all this financial game playing is going to be dumped on the American people, forgetting, of course, that we just don't have enough money to cover all the losses that they've built risk against.
Right, but that's essentially it, isn't it? Because now, as I understand it, because of what Dodd-Frank said, that the credit default swaps are on the top of the pyramid for getting paid off if the bank gets into financial trouble. But there isn't enough, unless they create trillions of new dollars, are these guys going to get paid off?
They're going to get paid off first, and bank customers and pensioners are down at the bottom of the heap. When it all implodes, the money junkies are going to grab what's left of the money, and you're going to be just out of luck.
But these derivatives total far much more than what the FDIC can actually cover, though, right? I mean,
well, see, that's why I think what they're trying to do is they're trying to pay off the debts that are covered by the credit default swaps, at which point the credit default swap becomes null and void. And they're paying it off by incurring other debts that aren't covered, nobody's selling credit default swaps on, in order to reduce their exposure. But these new debts are all covered under FDIC, and that's why the losses are coming to the American people. They're trying to pull out of the credit default swap nightmare is what I think is going on.
Well, we can agree, though, that there isn't enough money really in existence to cover the credit default swaps, right? Because we're talking quadrillions of dollars.
Yeah, but the debts that those credit default swaps cover are much smaller. Credit default swaps, anybody can buy them on a debt. You can have $100 worth of debt and have sold $1 million worth of credit default swaps on them. If you pay off that $100 in debt, the credit default swaps are null and void. And that's what I think they're trying to do.
But those credit default swaps have to be paid off, though, right? So
No. If the underlying debt does not default, they're not paid off. That's what they're doing. They're paying off the debt covered by the credit default swaps to prevent them from activating. I think that's what they're doing.
Now that could have really remedied a lot of situations in like 2008, where instead of paying off all these guys for the credit default swaps, they could have just paid off the debt, right? Or just say, look, all that money that we paid to the banks to cover this could have gone to the American people to pay off all their loans. The people on the credit default side would have been happy because they didn't incur any losses because those debts were paid off, right?
Yeah, but you need to understand the American people don't have much say with U.S. government fiscal policy because Wall Street is a very...
Why is it going to work this time as opposed to why they didn't implement it last time?
It's not going to work.
Okay?
In the long run, it can't work because, until somebody is willing to look at that design flaw in private central banking in that it creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt, they're never going to fix this system. They're just going to keep patching it, and they're going to try things like negative interest rates and bail-ins and bailouts and whatever they're going to call it to try and keep this little Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer until somebody else is in office or somebody else is in the boardroom and they get to eat it when it all falls apart. That's the thinking that you see in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street. Let's just keep it going a little bit longer, and I'm going to retire at the end of the year, and then it's somebody else's problem to deal with. But it's the nation's problem to deal with.
I guess when it all comes down, all these people that were trying to keep the system going and creating wealth for themselves, I mean, if $1,000 is going to be worth as much as $10 if the currency is devalued to nothing, so what are they hoping to gain? Well,
they're putting their wealth into hard assets. They're not piling up big, huge piles of ink and paper notes in their basement. They know it's not worth anything. They're buying up the hard assets. They're starting to buy gold and silver. More and more of these financial firms are investing in gold and silver. They're still struggling to keep the prices down, but everybody understands the paper currency is going to implode, and the move is on to try and, first of all, again, get out of that exposure of the derivatives and buy back stock and basically sort of pull their heads in underneath the turtle shell and ride it out. What they're acquiring are the hard assets, the real estate, the buildings, the infrastructure, the water company, the oil company. That's what they're grabbing because those will hold their value even when the currency implodes.
Well, that seems to make sense. Lastly, Mike, I don't know if you saw it or not, but Bix Weir came out with another interview, and he contends that they're actually sitting on a mountain of gold in the Grand Canyon somewhere. And their whole thing was to basically work with paper money until everything was crushed, and then they would have this secret stash of gold, which amounts to millions of tons, in order to start a new system with. Do you think that theory has any credibility?
I have seen nothing to indicate that. I mean, when you look at the way they're shuffling gold around, if they really had that big chunk of gold hidden somewhere in the Grand Canyon, then why were they shorting Germany of their gold and all these other countries?
Because Germany, why not screw over Germany first and then just keep what we have until the very end?
The problem is if you're seen screwing over Germany, then there's going to be a gold run, and everybody who's got gold on deposit at the New York Federal Reserve or J.P. Morgan or the Bank of England or the Bank of France, they're all going to demand for it back. And the risk of screwing over Germany is greater than the reward.
But as we've already seen, Germany hasn't been given back their gold, right?
They've only been given back a tiny portion of it. And they're not making a stink about it because their private central bank, the Bundesbank, is in cohorts with all the other private central banks, not the German government, not the German people. And so their attitude is, we're not going to make a stink about it. We trust the Federal Reserve. We know our gold is in there somewhere, even though what they got back weren't the actual bullion bars they sent over, didn't have the proper hallmarks, and turned out to only be 95% pure gold. So they're getting cheated, but it's one big brotherhood of private central banks, and they're just out for themselves, and to heck with the rest of the world. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, apparently the George Soros-funded liberal attack group Color of Change has sent over 20,000 emails, some of them from real-life human beings, to CNN, calling for the network to fire Jeff Lord and Andy Dean for daring to make positive comments about Donald Trump. And like I said earlier in the show, George Soros is becoming a very powerful argument for socialism in this country by demonstrating how individuals with way too much money are capable of a great deal of mischief. All right, we're going to grab ourselves some phone calls here. Scott in Virginia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Listen, I've been watching the coverage of Trump, and I just cannot believe what I'm seeing on TV, especially out of Fox. They're giving up the game. They really are showing us what's behind the curtain.
Mm-hmm.
And as a former Democrat who still considers himself liberal but has given up trusting any Democrat, I'm all for Trump, and I'll tell you why. And I think there's a lot of people like me. This election, for a lot of people, especially people like me who are disaffected with the Democratic Party, has nothing to do with voting for a president who's going to do something for us. We're voting for a president who's going to do something to the establishment. And that means we don't care about their personal life. We don't even care about their personality. All we care about is that they're going to do the job, and it's going to be a dirty job. It's kind of like hiring a personal injury lawyer. You really want the meanest, nastiest, most effective attorney. You're not really caring about how he talks to the public or if you like him or not. And I think that's where we are, and I think the media hasn't caught on to that fact yet.
Well, no, the media understands that's what Americans are thinking. They're trying to go back to this idea that we choose our presidents on the basis of a best-dressed, Ms. Congeniality contest. They don't want us thinking about the real issues and what the candidates are going to do about those issues, because then they lose control. Somebody else sent me another analogy about, the raccoons. If you've got a bunch of raccoons that have broken into your home and they're eating your food and they're making a mess, you want to hire somebody who's going to get those raccoons out. You don't care if they're dressed sloppy. You don't care if they smell bad. You don't care if they use profanity. You want somebody who's going to do the job and get the raccoons out. That's what we need. We need Donald Trump to get the raccoons out of our nation.
In my opinion, Mike, the best thing that could happen to Trump is when he gets to the nomination, that they try to steal it away from him, and that will give him he already has a lot of credibility as being anti-establishment, but that would be the ultimate in credibility. And I know that the public uprising that would happen would force the GOP's hand to give him the nomination, and he would be solid from then on there, because he would have taken on the party and won.
Well, I'm concerned that you are right, that if they cheat Trump of the nomination, or worse, they assassinate him, there will be a public uprising, which I'd kind of like to avoid. But apparently the leadership of the GOP is not only willing to give Hillary the White House next year, they're willing to risk an armed rebellion in this country so that they can keep their lock on the American political system. And you're absolutely right. Every day that goes by, they're demonstrating that we do not have a republic, we do not have a democracy, we have an oligarchy that is hiding behind a thin curtain called democracy, but it isn't real. Between the vote fraud and, Soros out there openly fomenting violence to try and get people away from Donald Trump. Why is Soros not in handcuffs? He's in violation of the USA Patriot Act.
Well, I think the litmus test, and I agree with what you just said, the litmus test is if they fill the Supreme Court vacancy that Scalia left. Because I heard that there's background talk between Mitch McConnell and the Obama administration about possibly filling that vacancy so as not to have that vacancy hang over this election and Trump use it to his advantage, because they're worried that with that vacancy hanging out in the election, that's going to even more motivate Republicans to turn out, even for somebody they may not like.
Yeah, that sounds like that would be a practical strategy.
If they do that, if Mitch McConnell fills that vacancy, not only the base of the Republican Party should be enraged, but all of us should be enraged because it was a total fraud. This two-party system is a total fraud.
It always has been. The two-party system was invented in order to reduce the costs to corporations. They only have to give donations to two candidates to completely bypass the will of the voters. They didn't like the old system where there were a whole bunch of different political parties because then it cost them more to hijack the nation for their own benefit.
Well, I hope for Trump's sake that no one tries anything, because he's taking on the military-industrial complex. And I'm all for it. I live in Norfolk, Virginia, which is a huge military town, but I don't want a military economy. And he's taking them on. He's saying, listen, these countries like Saudi Arabia need to pay for our protection. They probably won't, which means we're going to have to reduce the size of our military in some way, military spending. And that's going to, and even though he's proposing this publicly, he's still turning out large crowds. And most states depend on some amount of military basis for local economies. And even with that, even suggesting a cutback on that, people are coming out for him in droves.
Well, I know that people in uniform are supporting Trump because they're sick and tired. We've had 13 years of war, and we're seeing our young kids come back from these war zones killed and crippled. To what end? To make the rich richer than they already were? That's not what America is supposed to be about. And all of those people in these military industries, all of these factories can be diverted to making other things. We don't have to have a military economy. What we need is a revival of our manufacturing economy in all areas. I mean, China just came in and bought up, General Electric's appliance division? We're just giving it away. Let's start rebuilding America's manufacturing base, because that was the foundation that really did make this nation great.
And Trump made that argument perfectly when he brought in the fact that China was manipulating its currency. That throws the whole free market thing out the window. He said, they're not practicing free market. They're not taking our jobs legitimately by competing with us and doing it better and cheaper. They're doing it by fraud, by manipulating currency. And
yeah, but the U.S. has been doing that also. I mean, it's not like China's bad and we're good, although I'm sure a lot of Trump supporters want to hear that. But the U.S. has been manipulating markets and currency all along. I mean, remember, they just threw that whole Forex, $5 trillion a day in rigging. They just threw that case out of court saying, it'd be too much trouble to get successful prosecutions. We're just going to let them go, is what they said. Okay?
I think a lot of Americans want us to stop rigging our economy, too, with the Federal Reserve. We want that abolished.
Absolutely, we need that to be abolished. No nation under a private central bank has escaped an ultimate economic collapse because of that debt system. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back with more phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the telephones here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Okay, Michael. Aloha. Yeah, I've been looking at various bits of economic news this weekend. And what appears to be happening is that China isn't dumping its dollars on the market. It's buying assets, American assets in particular.
Yes.
And what's happened over the weekend is that the Starwood Hotel Group, which includes Sheraton and Westin and other hotel chains, this Angbang Group from China made an offer. But what seems significant is that this group was supposed to be moving into Cuba, having got permission from His Majesty Obama. And now China's just moving in because they bought the group.
Yeah, well, it's a smart move on their part.
But Marriott apparently have made a better offer, so it's now in the air again. But according to the information I'm reading, Angbang is about to come back with an even better offer, and it appears that Marriott may have given its best offer already. So China will win once more and move into Cuba instead of America?
I would not want to bet a sizable amount of money that Marriott's made their best offer up front. These negotiations go back and forth time and time again. I think Marriott will come back at least one more time.
Well, it depends, but apparently this Angbang group is backed by a huge international group of hedge funds and what have you, not just for money from the dollars coming out of China to buy goods in America.
Well, this isn't an art gallery where everybody's outbidding each other to own a masterpiece. I mean, whether it's Angbang or Marriott or anybody else, their bids are going to be based on how much money they think they can make off of these properties once they're in control. And, all of the grand hotels in Cuba that were left over from before the embargo, they're in a horrible state of repair. They're going to have to be completely rebuilt. And of course, legalized gambling down there. And it's going to be the Eastern Las Vegas, and I'm sure that's why so many people want to get on in there. But I wouldn't write off some American group getting back on in there, especially the corporations that own the hotels in Las Vegas, because Las Vegas isn't doing all that well, and a new Caribbean sin bin probably looks very attractive right now.
The other item I wanted to talk about is this latest coming out of Mr. Putin concerning Syria, where he's given America, the American military, till today to come up with a proper plan to go after ISIS. And if they don't, then all bets are off.
Well, basically what Putin said is that starting on tomorrow, Russia will punish anybody who breaks the ceasefire. And they wanted to cooperate with the United States in the targeting of ISIS and Al-Qaeda groups that are violating the ceasefire. The U.S. is refusing to do that. And Putin is basically saying, all right, if you're not going to work with us, we are going to go after any ISIS or Al-Qaeda that we detect are violating the ceasefire unilaterally.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know that certain American troops are embedded with these organizations.
Well, that can never officially be admitted to by our government. I mean, we already know the U.S. was supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. That's in the Hillary Clinton emails. And, you have to be, totally lost in the matrix of corporate news to not understand the double game that the U.S. government has been playing.
Well, it seems to me that the U.S. refusal to cooperate is actually escalating the situation just as the peace talks are really getting underway.
I think the U.S. refusal to cooperate is because the U.S. wants their assets in ISIS and Al-Qaeda protected. And they're not going to turn that information over to the Russians. Anyway, listen, John, I need to let you go. The phone lines are full, and I need to get back to the news here. So let's switch over to Terry in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just want to carry that conversation one more step that you had before the last one. I'd like to see Republicans cheat Trump out of the nomination and then him go over to a independent third party and win the election through a third party. And the message will be to people that there's an alternative to the two corruptions that we have going on in the mainstream.
Well, I'd love to see that happen, but the system is rigged against independent parties, and what would have to happen is Trump would have to mount massive petition drives in all 50 states and all U.S. territories in order to get on the ballot in November, and you can count that lawyers from the Republican and Democratic parties will be trying to find any way that they can say, oh, these signatures aren't legal, it's too late for them to get on the ballot. They'll execute lawfare against him to keep him off the ballot. The system is totally corrupt. They want you to vote for their pet candidates and nobody else, and they're willing to risk an armed uprising of the American people by playing this dirty.
Well, yeah, somebody's got if an organization surfaced that would educate the people on these facts and do what we got to do to get all the states involved in participating in the elections. That's what's really got to happen.
I would expect that probably some of Donald Trump's campaign people are already making those contingency plans because of how obvious it is they're going to try and railroad him at the convention. The only way Donald Trump is going to emerge from the convention as the nominee is if there is a reversal in enough states where Cruz is projected to win, and it goes over to Trump. Because if Trump can go in there with the minimum number of delegates, and I know we've got the Curly Hoagland saying no, it wasn't Curly Hoagland, it was another one of the Republican leadership saying no, the delegates don't have to vote the way their state voted. The delegates are all super delegates at the GOP. They can vote whatever the way they want, whatever way they're being blackmailed, whatever way they're being threatened. And but if that were to happen, it is going to destroy the Republican Party. And apparently the Republican Party leadership is okay with that. They're out there trying to say we have to get rid of Trump to protect the Republican Party. They have to get rid of Donald Trump to protect their own cozy little relationship with the money junkies. But I think it's time for both party leaderships to be given the old heave-ho.
Yeah, what's the latest in the lawsuits against Cruz's eligibility?
The judges just keep throwing them out of court without any comment, and they're blockading this. And I don't understand why they're doing this, because it's one thing for the GOP establishment and the corporate media to turn a blind eye to this, but if Cruz were to wind up as the GOP nominee, Hillary Clinton's lawyers are going to go right to court on this matter. And we'll go into November with just one candidate on the ballot, and that is dictatorship.
Right, and the Republican establishment would rather see Hillary Clinton in than Trump.
They've said as much. They've absolutely said as much.
Wow, how ridiculous. Okay, Mike, thanks a lot. I appreciate talking to you.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Mo in Florida. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Thank you for taking my call. I just a couple of quick ones here. I know you're coming up on the break. Are you, of course, I'm sure you are familiar with this face-to-face software that, they can put your face and, on YouTube and, mix it all together like you're talking.
Yeah, we put up the demo video at WhatReallyHappened.com, and it is a little bit scary where they can have somebody there saying words or acting in a certain way and map those motions onto the face of somebody very famous. And the example they used in the video was George W. Bush. Now, the state of the art isn't very good. To me, it's obvious that there is morphing taking place on the final output, but with a little bit of refinement, this could become an incredibly powerful and dishonest propaganda tool.
Yeah, that's the way I saw it. It still looks a little fake. The other question I have was just, when you see, and you're the perfect guy to ask this, these footage.
Okay, Mo, I'm going to put you on hold. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at the We Hate Donald Trump Network, formerly Fox News. John Kasich is now taking his turn at the podium up at AIPAC, and he's out there saying that if he is president, he will suspend the Iran nuclear deal, which is exactly what Israel wants to hear, that the U.S. is going to go ahead and smash Iran on behalf of Israel, on behalf of the oil companies, on behalf of the private central bankers. Remember, back in 2003, General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on the U.S. agenda for the Middle East to conquer and control all of the oil-rich nations of the Middle East so that they would trade their oil only for the U.S. dollar and prop up our banking system. And the last country on the list was Iran, to be invaded and conquered in 2008. Obviously, they're off the timeline. So if you want war with Iran, Kasich is your man. All right, let's get on back here to the phones. And Mo in Florida, real quick, you wanted to finish up on something?
Yeah, along the same lines, Michael. When somebody puts a video, like on YouTube, and it shows Building 7 with implosions, a new video, how do you tell? Is there a way to tell if that's real?
Well, there's a lot of different, when you're dealing with photo and imagery fakery, there's a lot of different things to look for. Are some areas of the image sharper and clearer than others? If it's blurred overall, that's usually a dead giveaway that somebody's faked something and the fake is obvious, so they'll blur it. But in this age of digital cameras on our cell phones and everything, every picture and every video ought to be crystal clear because of the automatic focus. So a good example would be somebody claimed to have found a video showing that a missile hit the Pentagon, and it was so blurred you really couldn't see much of anything. And what they were covering with the blur was that there was a bit of swim between the background image of the Pentagon and the image that was supposed to represent the missile. And you could tell from that it was a very sloppy composite. Another thing to look for is the lighting. Is the lighting consistent on every face, every body in the scene? Or are these three people lit from the left and this one over here is lit from the right? There are all kinds of things to look for. I wish there was a quick and easy method, but there isn't. It takes a lot of years to learn how to do visual effects and trickery, and from that education, of course, you learn how to spot it when other people are doing it.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Michael in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, what's your take on where Trump is today? Why did he go to speak? What does he hope to gain?
I think he wants to push his fair and balanced agenda. I think Trump felt that if he didn't show up at AIPAC, it would be worse than if he did. I know he had some meetings with the Republican leadership ahead of time. I have to applaud Bernie Sanders for not showing up. That's sending a very clear message that he's not there to kowtow to a foreign government. And, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu unusually did not personally attend this year's AIPAC. He's talking to them over a TV feed, which is a bit of a snub. He's expressing his displeasure.
Mike, Bernie wanted to address it via satellite link, and he was turned down, so he didn't show up. But
why did they accept Netanyahu's satellite link but not Bernie's?
That's a good question, but still, I'm not comfortable. You know, when people go to these kind of meetings, all kinds of deals are made. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is where Israel's supporters tell the government this is what you're going to do for the next few years. One of their big agendas right now is they want to criminalize criticism of Israel and criminalize the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Both of those are protected speech under the First Amendment. But as you can tell from Israel's admission that they assisted in the overthrow of Morsi in Egypt, they don't believe in democracy. They believe in the rulers rule and the people submit, and that's the way they think it's supposed to be. Israel's government runs Israel like it's still a Bronze Age tribal kingdom.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with him going there. That's all. I mean, and don't know what to vote anymore.
Well, we have to see what he's going to say. And if he sticks to his position about being a neutral arbiter, then he's going to come off looking really good. If he caves in, yeah, that's the end of his campaign. But I don't think Trump's going to do that. Anyway, listen, thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Willie in Pennsylvania. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Good to talk to you finally. I've been watching your website for a long time. I sent you 2 emails this weekend. One of them was an open letter to the RNC, and the other was a copy of email I sent to NBC. On last night's NBC Evening News, they showed a segment about the protesters, they called them, that were at the Donald Trump event. I believe it was in Arizona. One of them the woman was wearing a hood, KKK hood. The guy had an American flag shirt on, and a black man punched him as he walked up the steps. They left out that they were provocators.
Yes.
They were walking through the crowd doing Nazi salutes and wearing a KKK hood to make the legitimate people there look bad. They weren't protesting anything. They were provocators.
Yeah, they were. We put up that video of the guy with the KKK hood, and we did add the comment that the corporate media cut that part of it out. They're out there to say the Trump people are the violent people, and yet everybody who's been on the ground with the video, it shows the Trump people are just fine. It's these George Soros-backed disruptors who are causing all the violence, and the establishment media is trying to blame it all on Donald Trump. The only good news is they're so over the top and obvious with this, I think anybody with an IQ over 80 is going to see right through this.
Yes, they also didn't show that the guy that hit the guy fed up with him was a black man, because I don't think they wanted to show black supporters of Trump.
Yeah.
So I wrote and told them they were biased. Their biased censorship and reporting is extremely disgraceful, and that their biased agenda to stop Trump will fail.
Well, it's too soon to say whether it's going to succeed or it's going to fail. It's going to get contentious before it's over. I'm certainly very angry at, one more time after 2008 and 2012 of having the party leadership and the corporate media presume to choose for us who our candidates are going to be. That's not how this country is supposed to work. They're usurping the authority and the power of the American people, and it's time for it to stop.
Thank you, Mike, for all you do.
Thank you very much for the phone call. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All right, up in Canada, as you know, that their government, just as in the grip of Tel Aviv as the American government, has passed a law basically condemning any Canadians who support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. This responded with over 2,000 Canadians signing an online petition saying we will continue to support boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and daring the Canadian government to arrest them. Good for the Canadian people. I guess they are as sick of Israel's control over their government as Americans are here. I'm almost willing to bet the French are going to be the next to demand their government stop bowing to Tel Aviv. And those French people have got guillotines. It's really gone way too far. Israel controlled all these other governments because the people of those nations didn't see it happening. Now they see it. It's on full display. Got a coffee cup over in our online store that says, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it, and that's what we're doing right now. Israel's every move to control other people's countries is fully on display, and the people of those countries are not happy with it whatsoever. Now, turning on to Syria. The Syrian army has cut the supply route to Palmyra. They are starting the operation to retake Palmyra. They're making great progress, taking back the Syrian country for the Syrian people. 5 ceasefire violations in the past day, some of them targeting the humanitarian convoys. Now, as I was talking about with John in Barbados, Russia is going to start using military force against violators of the ceasefire starting tomorrow, and they sent a specific warning to the United States that if the U.S. does not want to cooperate and participate, Russia will do so unilaterally, and they will target these U.S.-backed covert proxies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda. More U.S. Marines heading to Iraq for ground combat. I'm losing count of how many times we've had to invade Iraq. Do you remember back in 2008 when then-candidate Obama promised the first thing he would do as president was to end the wars and bring our kids home? I think I still have that here in the... there we go. All right, I'll play that when we come back from the... Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. As we mentioned going into the news break, we have this situation where Marines are heading back into Iraq. I've lost count of how many times we've had to go back in there. And remember back in 2008 when then-candidate Obama was out there campaigning and what he promised?
I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
And obviously, that was one of many promises that Obama made that he never kept. So they're going on back. Now, it turns out the justification for this escalation was that a Marine was killed in a supposed ISIS rocket attack on Saturday. And it turned out the attack was against a U.S. fire base, which had been kept classified. They were setting up this secret fire base in northern Iraq, and now they've had to announce that, yes, they're setting up this fire base. We don't know if the Iraq government asked them to do that. What we hear from the Iraqi military is the U.S. forces are getting in the way of trying to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda out of Iraq. Now, Saturday was a very tragic anniversary, 13 years. On March 19, 2003, the U.S. troops invaded Iraq for the second time. Don't forget Desert Stomp. 9 years of military occupation, and even though the U.S. nominally withdrew from Iraq in 2011, obviously we're back in there again. Got to keep control of those pesky provinces that are thinking they can get along better without foreign puppet ruler. Now, the Houthis and the installed government of Yemen are agreeing on a truce before the next round of talks. They're going to try and find some kind of a compromise to get that situation under control. Meanwhile, we are hearing from Press TV that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are trying to disrupt the Syria peace talks going on in Geneva, trying to wreck that before it gets a chance off the ground. As you know, Barack Obama and his family are down in Cuba. They're touring around. They're trying to normalize relations. And I understand why Obama is doing this. I know it's got a lot of hostility coming from the United States. But if we are going to go to war against Russia, the last thing they want is another Russian satellite in the Caribbean. And the irony is, when Fidel Castro kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, Batista, he made his first diplomatic overtures to the United States and said, look, I want to be friends with you guys. I want to go on selling you our sugar, our agricultural produce. I want, you're going to have to pay the fair market price for it. But the U.S. attitude was, no, if you're not one of our puppet rulers, we are going to embargo you. And that's what drove Cuba into Soviet control. Now, Raul Castro is saying, it's all great, hotels, business, and everything, but there are two things that have to happen before relations are fully normalized. The U.S. has to give back Guantanamo, and they have to fully lift the embargo. And they may get it. Now, again, I agree with Obama's decision on Cuba. The strategic necessity of not leaving a welcome mat out in the Caribbean for Russia to come in on. So he's actually being very smart. Now then, let's talk about the weapons of war. Oh, the woes of the F-35. Over at Activist Post, I got a story. Military finally admits $1 trillion F-35 program is a failure. The plane is riddled with technical flaws. It lacks maneuverability. Now they revealed that the radar system keeps locking up and has to be constantly rebooted. And each of these problem-prone aircraft is costing 3 to 5 times as much to manufacture as the older, more reliable fighter jets like the F-15 and F-16. Now officials at the Pentagon are admitting this massive boondoggle is a total bust, but it's safe for them to do that because it's now established too many states have got contracts for the F-35 and it can't be killed for political reasons. But two generals at the Pentagon were saying the whole idea of an all-purpose aircraft was flawed from the start. You get more efficient weapons when they are built for specific tactical purposes. The Pentagon is already planning the 6th-generation fighter to replace the F-35. They're going to spend a huge amount of money on it, and then it's going to be sent off to air museums, put on display there. Another article coming out of Global Research, the F-35 strike fighter, technical failures of the world's most expensive weapons system. It turns out, along with leaking oil and exploding engines, apparently it can only fly when the weather is good. Apparently it cannot fly in complete safety in the rain. And apparently the F-35 is supposed to be deployed on Britain's new aircraft carrier, the Queen Elizabeth. They're now saying it'll be 2018 at the earliest before it's ready to go on that. The Department of Defense has issued a corrosion report on both the F-35 and F-22, saying that neither one of them meet the corrosion resistance standards in the original contracts. And even more embarrassing, this is coming out of the Daily Beast. The F-35 stealth capability is focused on X-band radar. Apparently, if you light it up with a VHF radar, it's shiny. Sticks out like a sore thumb. It's amazing. All right, let's talk about the economy. I know we're running late here in the third hour. World trade coming to virtual standstill. Some truckers stuck for a week at a time waiting for product to haul. The economy's in a shambles, and it only appears to look strong because of the hot money that's holding it up. In other words, the rigging of the stock market, the bail-ins, the negative interest, all these little Band-Aids they're putting on to try and make the economy look good in this election year. But Claire and I were down at the local supermarket. Talk about major empty spaces on the shelves. I remember when I was in grade school and I was getting my brainwashing about how terrible life was in the Soviet Union. And one of the devices they would use was to show these American supermarkets just filled to abundance with products and stuff, and then contrast them with photos supposedly taken of Soviet Union supermarkets with acres and acres of bare shelves. And now we're there. Former Fed Chairman Bernanke is out there saying monetary policy is reaching its limits. He is one of a chorus of voices saying they've run out of tricks on what to do. And he says a balanced monetary fiscal response is what is needed. In other words, the government has to cut spending somewhere. Those wars are very expensive. I suggest that we start there. Last week, European Central Bank Chief Mario Draghi announced a much bigger and wider-ranging stimulus package than anyone expected. The ECB's bond-buying program will have no impact on employment, business investment, inflation, lending, or growth. It just papers over the failings of the European Central Bank, just like all the quantitative easing and bailouts here in the United States of America have been good to prop up the banks, but they haven't changed the unemployment, manufacturing, or investment development of this country. It's just looking good. As long as they have those printing presses, they can keep themselves rich, and the rest of the world is going to heck in a handbasket. The largest U.S. oil refinery now belongs to Saudi Arabia. They're selling off the country bit by bit by bit. China is acquiring U.S. corporations. They just picked up General Electric's appliance business for $5.4 billion. The U.S. is selling off the means by which they could make money by manufacturing. It's a fire sale, is what they're doing. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just getting this story. Apparently, hundreds of anti-Trump protesters are outside AIPAC, flashing around signs with Nazi imagery and Hitler on them. That one is going to backflash on them rather badly here. Getting on back to the economy, 12 Obamacare insurance co-ops have collapsed after getting $1.2 billion from the taxpayers. Obamacare is a disaster, both for its overt purpose of making health care affordable and its covert purpose of generating vast new tax revenues for the U.S. government, which is why Obama is going to come back with a carbon tax as soon as the spring thaw is over and they can start ginning up the numbers and saying, boy, this is the hottest year on record, which, by the way, that claim turned out to be a fraud. They were cherry-picking the data. They went back to find a cool year, and then they drew the trend from that. And if you go back to like the 1930s, there's been no warming whatsoever. Now then, things are very hard in this country. You don't need me to tell you that. Interesting article coming out of Alternet on $6 billion industries that make their profit from exploiting the poor. These are check-cashing businesses, pawn shops, overdraft fees, payday loans, car title loans, and debt collection. And it's worth recalling that as Germany sunk into the Weimar inflation, there were similar businesses operating in Germany that preyed upon cash-tight German people. And it is those businesses that built up that huge resentment toward the banking class that the Nazis successfully exploited. History may not repeat, but it certainly does seem to rhyme. The CEO of the Australian Stock Exchange has quit amid a bribery investigation. And interestingly enough, the New York Post is predicting that the president of MSNBC, Phil Griffin, is about to be fired. Much of his duties have already been taken away, and apparently Janelle Rodriguez was hired from CNN to oversee MSNBC's dayside programming, which used to be under Phil Griffin. But here's the reality of what's going on. Nobody likes a liar, and the corporate media will not regain their audience and profitability until they start remembering their job is to inform and educate the public, not spoon-feed us corporate and government propaganda. Remember what Edward R. Murrow said in that speech about the right way and the wrong way to use TV news. Turning to immigration, apparently there's a huge amount of anger over the fact that Obama is bringing over 5,000 Muslim migrants to Michigan. Now, Michigan does not have enough safe drinking water for the existing legal citizenry. Neither does California, a lot of other places. But this reckless push to blend all humanity together to prepare for the New World Order proceeds at full speed. And those Muslim migrants are going to be suffering damage from the toxic drinking water right alongside the regular Michigan residents. But the people behind the New World Order don't care. Apparently, a plane bound for Italy with migrants was grounded in Greece, not allowed to proceed. And now we're hearing British warships will intercept migrants off the shores of Libya. This whole New World Order, European Union thing is falling apart. Now Germany is starting to talk about a UK-style referendum, whether to stay in the EU or not. Another bloody nose for Angela Merkel. French voters are starting to talk about a Frexit. Apparently more than half of French voters now want an in-out referendum on the European Union. Because it's all been downside. The European Union takes money away from the member nations. The European Central Bank loots them with their fiat currency. And all they get back are all kinds of little nitpicky laws on how they're supposed to run their lives. It's all downside. Now, getting on over to the Lavoie Finicum case, this one is just getting smellier and smellier as time goes on. Apparently, there were 2 bullet casings reported by the initial investigators at the scene, bullet casings located where an FBI agent is seen on video to shoot at Finicum, whose hands are up when he's shot. And apparently those bullet casings have now disappeared. Who knows where they went? They just went away. There's not a shred of evidence the FBI did anything wrong. Article coming out of freedomoutpost.com. According to Nevada Assemblywoman Michelle Fiore, if you were at the Bundy Ranch and you had a gun, Nevada prosecutors are looking to arrest you. Even if you never took the gun out, even if you never used it. They're trying to make an example of anybody who stands up to government tyranny. Speaking of which, over at Apple, we're hearing again that more and more of the software engineers at Apple are saying that if they are ordered by the government to unlock the iPhones, they're going to quit. They are just going to quit. They're not going to go along with it. Good for the Apple engineers. Now, what we have here is the U.S. government throwing its weight around like a typical dictatorship, getting what it wants only because it wants it, and not because it will accomplish anything. After all the news reporting about government backdoors, does anyone think real criminals or terrorists will ever use those devices or rely on the approved encryption? Of course not. Edward Snowden confirms the NSA has never succeeded in preventing a terror attack, and the tsunami of ransomware and malware and other cyber attacks proves that criminals are already using their own systems of encryption. They're immune to the NSA. The NSA's sole job is to look at you. We have the U.S. government wasting billions of dollars to spy on law-abiding citizens who are not doing anything wrong, while the real criminals and terrorists rampage across our society unhindered. Story out of the Free Thought Project. Declassified secret letter exposes warrantless surveillance program as ineffective sham. It doesn't work. They're not catching any real criminals and terrorists. And as it turns out, the Paris terrorists did not use encryption to evade detection. They used burner phones, these short-term disposable phones. They just bought a bunch of them. They swapped the SIM cards, and that's why they were invisible. They didn't use the internet. They didn't use email. They didn't use text messaging because they know it's being watched by the government. Meanwhile, we're seeing another story. This is from Russia Insider, how the ISIS Twitter account numbers were traced to the British government. Apparently, the British government sold off a block of their their Twitter account IPs to Saudi Arabia. That's where all this ISIS stuff is coming from. It's just more propaganda. Meanwhile, remember that U.S. State Department employee from London who was committing extortion, broke into women's computers, stole naked pictures of them, threatened to post them unless they send him naked videos and other things? Well, he got sentenced to 4 3/4 years in prison. And this is why we don't want the government looking inside our private computers. They cannot be trusted. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as you know, spring has sprung. We had the equinox just yesterday. We are officially in spring, and we celebrated by having snowfall in St. Louis. They're warning Winter Storm Regis will impact the east for the start of the spring. Winter storm warnings posted. There's a winter storm watch in effect for western lower Michigan, and they're expecting a massive blizzard to hit Nebraska on Wednesday of this week. Gosh darn that human-caused global warming. Now, over in Flint, Hillary Clinton was down there talking about the water crisis and saying, well, it's just going to take years before we can deal with this. It's not a high priority. You're just going to have to deal with it. And the Flint water whistleblower who made this thing public was out there saying Clinton's obvious not caring just made her sick to her stomach. And I know what we're getting from Hillary and from Obama and the rest of it. What is it with you people? This obsession with safe and healthy food and water. You take what we give you and you like it, or we'll put your name on the terror suspects list and then you'll be sorry. Now, as it turns out, apparently the EPA up in Ohio knew they had problems with their water months ago and did not issue an alert to the general public. Did not warn the public the water coming out of their tap was toxic. High levels of lead. We just want it to look good for the election year. We don't care if it really is good or not. We've got our bottled water. What do we care over here in the government? Apparently, a toxic carcinogen, 1,4-dioxane, has been found at toxic levels in 80 New Jersey water systems. Now, in addition to being a carcinogen, it can damage the liver, kidney, and respiratory systems. If you want to know why Americans seem to be chronically ill all the time, it's because the government has just decided that there's no point in spending your tax dollars on safe, clean water systems or safe, clean food. All the better to give it to Israel, which they're all promising to do over there at the AIPAC conference, or to prop up Wall Street, or to fight these wars of aggression to conquer other people's countries and bring the American system of government to them, which means lead pipes and toxic drinking water over there. Apparently, high levels of lead have been found in the drinking water in 10 Oregon schools. Now, Erin Brockovich, probably remember the movie that was made about her story over the Pacific Gas and Electric lawsuit, the hexavalent chromium. Well, they're now on this toxic water situation. And Brockovich is saying that they have already compiled a map of 10,000 communities across the U.S. whose populations are suffering adverse effects due to polluted and contaminated water supplies. Meanwhile, out in California, Nestle's been given another green light to suck all the water out of one of the remaining aquifers for a grand total of $500. Isn't that wonderful? Then the people at Nestle will put it in a bottle and sell it back to you for a couple of bucks. It generates money, it makes money, it generates tax revenues, and that's why the government is, to heck with the tap water. We want you buying your bottled water. Next it'll be bottled air. Another story coming out of today.com. There are now 58,495 bridges in the U.S. that have been deemed structurally deficient. You're talking about one incident in Salt Lake City. Guy was driving his little van, airport shuttle van, along the freeway, and a big chunk of concrete fell from the overpass, crashed into his car. And I'm sure what we're going to hear from Washington, D.C. is, look, if we spend your tax money on safe bridges and safe water and safe food and safe medication, then we couldn't send your tax money to Israel or prop up Wall Street or start wars with it. Come on, people. Get some priorities. Get with the program. Does it sound like we have a well-run country right now? It doesn't to me. I mean, government is the most expensive thing you will ever be forced to buy in your entire life. Are you getting value for that dollar? I think the answer for the vast majority of Americans is no, we're not. Now, over in France, Professor Gilles-Éric Seralini, who was the lead author of that study showing that rats fed glyphosate and GMO corn started developing massive tumors at 4 months, just 1 month after Monsanto cut off their own rat studies to declare it all safe. He's won a second court case against the France's Biomolecular Engineering Commission. Mark Fellis, the former chairman of that commission, has been indicted for forgery and use of forgery to try and discredit Seralini's research. They lied. Because we've got to protect Monsanto, because Monsanto has money. All worship the money. All hail the big M, as it were. Now, this BEC commission authorized multiple GM crops as safe for human consumption. And when Seralini proved that that was wrong, oh, we've got to protect ourselves. We've got to discredit the man. We've got to smear him. Now, General Mills, now that the Dark Act was voted down, I'm sure they'll be back, but it's been voted down. General Mills has announced they will label GMOs on their products nationwide, conforming with the labeling requirements now in place up in Vermont. And what is going to happen is people will avoid buying those products, and General Mills will go back to non-GMO content to stay in business. Then they'll put that on their boxes. At which point, the majority of cereal buyers are going to start buying General Mills cereals. It's the beginning of the big reversal. We don't want your GMO. We don't want you to tell us that we're not allowed to know what is in the food we put in our bodies, especially because so much of it turns out to be toxic. Now, the FDA, extending their reach a little bit more, has now outlawed all hemp extracts, hemp oil extracts, saying that all of the molecules of cannabis now belong exclusively to Big Pharma. They haven't patented them. But the FDA has declared these chemicals as part of active investigations for new medications. And so Big Pharma gets to play with them and you do not. That's their logic. Because Big Pharma is looking at them, you're not allowed to play with them. We have to protect the profits of Big Pharma. It's an election year. Basically, the agenda is that if something is useful and produced by nature, you slaves are not allowed to make it or grow it or use it. You will buy it from large corporations because dependency is slavery. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. John on the West Coast. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Just to jump off the subject, I'd like to make a statement. I think Trump should pick Victor McKinney as VP. She's a smart minority woman that's very intelligent. She's anti-APAC, anti-establishment, and she's a guarantee that Donald Trump will not be touched. If the second time it's Trump, she'll be president. And all this racist gossip about him. What do you think?
I would love to see that happen. I think Trump needs to name a female vice president. Cynthia McKinney would be great if she's willing to go back into public life. And it would certainly yank the vagina vote out from underneath Hillary and the black vote with it. I think it would be a very, very smart thing for him to do.
I hope they're listening. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go here. We're going to close the phone lines and be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And Donald Trump is making his speech in front of AIPAC, and he's trying to basically sell an agenda of isolating Israel and Palestine from outside interference while they work their problems out between them. He's talking about no preconditions on peace talks. He's promising to keep the UN at arm's length, and he's trying to walk a fine line between his being a neutral arbiter of Israel and Palestine and saying that he's not going to be a threat to Israel. And I don't know where I want to look at this very, very closely. But Fox News is focusing on Trump's statement that he's going to veto any attempt by the UN to impose the will on Israel. Well, I'm not sure I like that. The UN is supposed to keep the member nations in line. And the vast majority of UN resolutions against Israel have been to address Israel's crimes against Palestine. So Trump may be playing politics here, but on the other hand, that's where he is. He's at AIPAC. And everybody at AIPAC says what Israel wants to hear. All right, getting on back to the health and safety and science situation. Apparently down in Florida, they have a problem with radioactive tritium, 200 times normal level from the Turkey Point reactor. That's leaking. All right. This is kind of a silly story. I'm going to mention it anyway. It came out of Natural News, and it's talking about how people, in order to get more interesting selfies for their social media, they're abusing wildlife. And apparently there's this species of dolphin, which is very easy to catch. It's very small. And they're picking this dolphin up and posing with it for selfies, and the dolphins are being injured and in many cases killed. And I think that really is very tragic. But beyond that, I see this whole idea of a selfie as a symptom of a vain and self-obsessed culture. Now, I've only ever taken one selfie myself, and that was to prove to somebody I was wearing a T-shirt they'd sent me. I don't need to take selfies. I know what I look like. I want my photographs to record something I haven't seen or wish to remember and cannot take with me. But I think this whole selfie phenomenon is just absurd. It's vanity run amok on a technological basis. And yes, it's good for the ISPs because the selfies use up those connection minutes and improve their profitability. Seems very, very conceited. Alrighty, now here's another article. This is in Patriot Rising. And it says, Americans more skeptical of God than ever. Researchers have found that the percentage of Americans who claim they never pray reached an all-time high in 2014, up fivefold since the 1980s. Over the same time, belief in God and interest in spirituality appears to have declined, especially among young adults. And I think we're entering an age of reason, and certainly this epidemic of clergy child sexual abuse has to be at the heart of a lot of it. I mean, in the age of the Internet, these stories get out. Before the Internet, reporters who found this stuff out, they would decide, oh, I'm a faithful, follower of the church, or their editor was a faithful. No, we're not going to talk about that. We don't want to shame the church because Father O'Flaccid has been out there with the choir boys again. But you can't keep those things hidden in the age of the Internet, in the independent media. And it needs to be put on out there. And I think for a lot of people, they're looking at this and saying, I cannot reconcile the behavior of these priests with the claim that they represent some kind of a divine, supreme moral authority on earth. And it is taking its toll. Economically, as the churches get sued, and church attendance is in decline. And that may be a good thing. And I'm not challenging those people who need to have a religion to feel good about themselves or feel that they've got a place in the world. But history has shown that tyrants use religion as part of the system of control over people. Don't stand up to your rulers. God won't like it. We've seen that repeated throughout history. All the way back to the Roman Empire. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. Most of what we think is the New Testament was written specifically for Roman economy and Roman politics. It was there to serve the state. Constantine made Christianity the official religion of Rome, not because he was an ardent believer, but because he saw the majority of people were going with that religion, so he grabbed it, installed it, and co-opted it. It's been ever thus. All righty, let's see. Getting on down here, we're seeing another article. This is coming out of Ex-Republic TV. They're saying that the anti-Trump campaign has now spent $520 million against Trump. $500 million they put into this thing to try and get rid of him. And it's simply not working. Let's see. EU-funded BBC documentary on Obama sparks allegations of anti-Brexit bias. Well, we know they're already biased on that one here. Somebody actually got money out in Baltimore, Maryland, to run a study saying that people who live in areas with a high rat population are much more likely to report sadness, anxiety, and other symptoms of depression, according to a new study. It's all the fault of the rats. Well, we'll send them over for electroconvulsive therapy. The rats, that is, because the FDA just approved that. It's not a direct link. Rats don't make you depressed. It's a causal relationship. The living conditions which are conducive to high rat populations are not very good. And yeah, you're going to be upset about it. Seeing more and more of these articles, if Hillary isn't indicted, the rule of law and the Republic are dead. Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Student loan defaults have hit $121 billion. 40% of all student loan borrowers are not making any more payments. That's going to be the next big bubble to implode. Seeing more and more coverage of this story about how the Soros group Color of Change is telling CNN to fire their reporters reporting positively on Donald Trump here. Now, at this particular point, let's go back and talk about Ted Cruz. For Ted Cruz to win the nomination, he needs to win 87% of the remaining primaries and caucuses. It's not going to happen. That's why they're pushing for a brokered convention, and they're going to try and change the rules so they can kick Donald Trump out and put Ted Cruz in. Even though Ted Cruz has a built-in self-destruct mechanism. All the Cruz supporters and all the GOP and all the establishment media can look the other way and pretend Ted Cruz is constitutionally eligible to be president. But if he is the GOP nominee, Hillary's lawyers will move on it immediately. They'll get him kicked out of the election, and we'll go into November with just one name on the presidential ballot. And that is not what the United States is supposed to be. On the other side, we're seeing this article in Investment Watch blog, Trump will break the GOP control on reality. Boy, I would love to see that. Something else Trump has said at AIPAC is Israel can pay for its own defense needs. Yeah, they can. Look how much money they've got. The American taxpayer has been forced to give to Israel something like 15 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, and we have yet to get a giant step for mankind, or even a new version of Velcro out of all that money. There's the music. Time for me to go on out and do Jim Goddard's show from Vancouver. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical. Please support Donald Trump. We need to send a message to the GOP that we, the people, pick the candidates and our leaders, not the party apparatchiks. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.